how does the rest of the world, and I'm particularly interested in how the North sees it, how do you manage that over time in such a way that it's exactly that, it's managed as opposed it's a stop and start?
I think that's one of the things that everyone is grappling with. And the reality is that we've had these transitions before. So, if you go to the north of England or lots of, areas in France, you had these transitions when you had coal mines and coal fields closed down. And you're going to have these transitions now. So, if you go to Aberdeen, that's 250,000 people directly employed by the oil and gas industry. That is an industry that needs to change. So you're seeing significant thinking around how do we bring in hydrogen? How do we use the structures, the skills that we have to deliver these new industries? So these transitions need to happen everywhere. And I think, obviously, what's really challenging in a South African context is that we know we're not starting probably from a just place in any case. So we've got this double whammy of trying to address historical wrongs whilst navigating something that is going to be even more change at very, very significant speed, I think.
Absolutely.
Is challenging.
Thomas, let me bring you in here. Let's talk about that South Africa lens and the rest of Africa lens.
Yeah.
From a practical business sense, how do you see it play out in our context? Because climate change, absolutely important. Net zero, absolutely important. But the lens of Africa are not the lens of the rest of the world.
Thanks for that question and building up from the previous speaker. In my travel in the continent, Zambia and Zimbabwe and other countries, what we find is that the issue of climate change, it is important in conversations that take place. But in the continent, we're grappling with the foundational issues that needs to be addressed. As much as climate change is important, we see Africa still a developing continent, definitely. There's issues of poverty, food insecurity, you've got inadequate healthcare and education gaps. So those are the socioeconomic gaps that we find that countries in the continent are prioritizing, because those are the foundational things, all right? And these challenges that we see in the continent, really, they affect the daily lives of people. As much as climate change is important, you get a particular prioritization of socioeconomic issues. What we also find as well is the limited resources that we find. Some of the solutions to move the continent to net zero, they are still costly. And it becomes an issue of accessibility and an issue of saying you've got limited capital. What then do you prioritize? Do you prioritize the infrastructure that really gets you the output at a higher margin, or do you look at climate change in that lane? So it is important, but there are some practical on-the-ground challenges that we find that the leaders in the continent are prioritizing. Not to say climate change is not important.
And I guess I'm interested, what is the role then of collaborating more around research to empower these leaders to make the right calls? Because as you rightfully say, the priorities are competing here. There's some bread and butter issues, quote unquote, but there's also some real issues insofar as climate change is concerned. So what do you think is the role institutions such as GIBS or many others in trying to empower the political and business leaders to make the right, call it, priority decisions?
I think from our side, what we see happening is that the financial institutions needs to do much more collaboration in terms of funding research of sustainable solutions.
Right.
That when you incorporate them into the system, they can be able to make meaningful impact as well. But we also find that we're trying to do too many things at once, and we've got limited resources. So we need to have that clarity in terms of what is our priorities in the next few years, in the short term, in the long term. Because strategically, trying to do everything at once won't work. Right. So that prioritization is very important. And the one key thing that we need to see coming into the system really is the financial institution collaborating with institutions like GIBS and other business schools just to enhance the quality of research around climate change, because there is much more we can get around the research space. For example, how do you design the financial products in the insurance space? How do you design the funding model? In fact, how do you improve the current models that financial institutions are using to assess risk and where they base their decision of funding? So by collaboration, we will be able to enhance those and also bring an outside perspective into a financial service industry that can add a lot of value into this space.